So this, of course, is the big question. Is Xi Jinping simply unwilling to accept Western vaccines despite the challenges that China is facing? Now, this is according to the US intelligence. Even though China is facing severe social and economic impact of the virus, its president Xi Jinping is unwilling to take a better vaccine from the West and is, of course, relying on vaccines made in China, and that's just not effective against the Omicron strain of the infection. But how would that help relax China's numbers of COVID-infected people as the country has sought to ease its zero-COVID policy? Now remember, in just the last 24 hours, China has reported 31,000 cases of infections, as against 33,000 infections that had been reported a day before. Now the quick decline in the numbers is being attributed to the easing of zero-COVID policy and the COVID testing norms, as COVID booths are getting removed from public spaces. Now, experts say that the only way for China to combat its big number of COVID-19 infections is to increase its vaccination rate, especially for the citizens in the age group of 60 and above. A huge number of people within China, especially the elderly population, still remains unvaccinated. All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of how all of this is, of course, likely to play out, and is it geopolitics that is trumping over a public health necessity? To help us understand that better, we're being joined by Andrew Leung, who's a China analyst, who's joining us live from Hong Kong. Ms. Leung, this, of course, is a question that a lot of people are, in fact, asking. Looking at the number of infections that have been witnessed in China of late, and also the protests that have been sparked because of the zero-COVID policy, it's now being suggested that perhaps China is not willing to take vaccines from the West, which perhaps could be more effective in clamping down on infections. Is that how you view this as well, that it is geopolitics which is trumping an immediate and an urgent need to address a public health crisis that China is presently facing?
Well, I think that people have got to look at the facts. The facts remain that as recently as January this year, 2022, there was an international survey conducted by a world-renowned research institution based in New York called Elderman Trust Barometer, EDELMAN, Elderman Trust Barometer, a world-renowned research institution based in New York. And they look around the world and how people in various countries view how their governments coping with the pandemic.
Right.
China came on top. Now, this suggests that China's policy had been very successful up to now.
Mr. Leung, if I can just interrupt you there. The study that you're suggesting is, as you admitted, from January or February earlier this year. It's been more than 10 months since then, and a lot has happened in these 10 months. You know, what we've witnessed in China is almost unprecedented. People coming out onto the streets expressing dissent openly against the Chinese government's zero-COVID lockdown that have been imposed. In places such as Xinjiang, in Shanghai, in Beijing, hundreds, if not thousands of people were out on the streets saying that they are not happy with these snap lockdowns that have been imposed, because nowhere in the world on a scale as large as this have snap lockdown been imposed. So the question that I'm asking you is, should China not have a rethink in terms of its zero-COVID policy? And if vaccines from the West can help, should China not actually go on and take those vaccines?
Well, it's nothing to do with geopolitics. As I was saying, that the pandemics have been carrying on for over 3 years now. And the first 2 years, China had been very successful using its own vaccines. So its own vaccines not that ineffective. But the fact remains that the vaccination rate, especially the vulnerable groups, are very, very low. Now, of course, it's been 3 years and people's patience is wearing thin. And as President Xi himself personally told the visiting European Council president only a couple of days ago, I think it was only 2 days ago, openly said that he realized that people's patience are very thin. And also he highlighted the fact that the pandemic has been changing, and there is a much lower death rate. And in a sense that this new variant is less destructive. So, and in fact, even before then, already diktats have been sent by Beijing to the provincial party secretaries and so on and so forth, and trying to encourage them to adopt a more flexible strategy. But since the presidency's meeting with the European Union Council president, you can see that the lockdown has been greatly eased, especially in Guangzhou. I mean, Guangzhou just jump on the queue and say, well, and now that the situation is largely contained, so they're immediately passing a lot of all these restrictions. And the so-called protests are dying down.
All right. Now, Mr. Leung, my final question to you, and very quickly on this. Do you think the Chinese administration is in fact willing to take the feedback from the people of China? Because what we are looking at in the last few days is that in places such as Xinjiang, the lockdowns have been relaxed to a certain extent. Do you think the Chinese administration will now want to move away from the zero COVID policy, which has been a pet project of Xi Jinping?
Well, I think there is a great deal of misunderstanding about the so-called zero COVID policy. Zero COVID doesn't mean absolute zero. It only means earliest possible detection, earliest possible isolation, earliest possible prevention, and earliest possible cure, with the result of turning things around. And as I said, it had been very, very successful until people's patience beginning to wear thin.
Right.
I think that according to all estimates, including Goldman Sachs recently, chances are that all the restrictions are likely to be removed, if not all, by the first quarter of next year. It doesn't mean that China is going to copy the West lying down flat kind of attitude, because there are still very many vulnerable groups.
Absolutely, indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Andrew Leung, for joining us from Hong Kong and getting us all those insights there.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.